Yeah, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Warm welcome to Berlinale Talents. Warm welcome also to the Year of Collectives. It's not that we are uncollective in other years, but this year particularly. With this in mind and with the idea of having also at least, I would say, one session which is like fully focusing on curating, programming, whatever this term you want to use, we thought if you do something with curators, you shouldn't curate them. So you should just let them go. So we gave them the Carte Blanche. It's actually also a good challenge to us to break some hierarchies in between who is actually owning the program, who is defining it so much. So I'm as curious as you are to find out what this session is going to be about. I know it's going to be great because we have a great panel here already. And I will leave the floor to Djamila Grandits to introduce you to the four, including herself. And I wish you a pleasant, wonderful talk. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Florian, and thank you, Talents, for inviting us for this Carte Blanche session. Good morning and a warm welcome also from my side. So this session is on Crossroads on curation, and it was meant to be a spontaneous curators collective, and it's actually what it's going to be. So the four of us come from all different fields within the art world and the film industry, and we're going to exchange ideas on accesses and approaches to curation and to programming. But let me introduce you to our wonderful guests. To my right, there's María Berríos. She's a sociologist, writer, independent curator, and co-founder of the Chilean editorial collective Vaticano Chico. Her work traverses art, culture, and politics with a special interest in the collective experiments of the Third World Movement and their exhibition formats in the 60s and 70s. Beside her is Claire Diao. She's a member of the Fortnight Selection Committee in Cannes. She hosts the weekly TV show Ciné on Canal Plus and runs the distribution company Pseudo Connection. And she collaborates with the Clermont-Ferrand Institute International Short Film Festival, and in 2018 she received the Beaumarchais Medal for her essay Double Vague, le nouveau souffle du cinéma français, and was listed as one of the 2019 future leaders and programmers and curators by Screen International. And to her right, there's Fatma Çolakoğlu. She's been a curator for exhibitions, film, and video art for 15 years. In 2005, she established the film department of the Istanbul Modern Museum of Contemporary Art, and subsequently she was responsible for film and video program of Pera Film and headed the communications department of the Pera Museum in Istanbul, and today she's the associate director for research and programming at SALT Istanbul. So, myself, my name is Djamila Grandits. I'm working and I'm based in Vienna. I'm part of the Curators Collective CineCollective. What we do is site-specific movie programming, and we do have an open-air cinema going on each summer, and I'm active as a programmer for different other festivals and doing all kinds of work in the industry as a cultural worker. So what I would like to start off with is just for you, the three of you, to add on what I just introduced you with, telling us about the current projects you're working on, to what extent curatorial work is important in those contexts, and also where collective approaches might be of special value in your current practice. Fatma, do you want to start?
It's on, probably. Oh, hello. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. So I think I do programming, actually, at a not-for-profit cultural institution in Istanbul, and maybe it's best I just say a few words about SALT, just to give you a context. And as I said, so SALT is a not-for-profit, it's a public institution, but it's private. So in Istanbul, the cultural landscape, the most exciting projects are usually happening more on the private side of it. So we're not at all state-funded or state-governed in that sense. And SALT is primarily founded on an archive that goes way back to the late 19th century and the 20th century. And we tackle a couple of different subjects. So it's art and design, also economy and social histories. So our motto and our projects are usually research-based, and then it turns into programs. Certain research projects might turn into an exhibition, might turn into a symposium, might turn into a talk or a screening. So, but most of our public programmings are based on screenings and presentations of a wide range of content, I should say. And for example, one of our biggest film programs that we do is on a yearly basis called our Thursday Cinema, which is a program concerned with the cityscape, the city landscape, and stories that take place in the city. And we usually try to give visibility to fiction as much as other different film essays and documentaries. So each year we'll launch to 23 to 25 films that kind of encapsulates a different theme within the city. So this year, we're actually looking at urban culture. Last year, we actually tackled the 90s and cities, and suddenly that's when I realized how much technology had changed. Of course, now you'll know my age because I remember the 90s so well. But it's interesting because that's when I realized how hard it was to get certain copies, and I thought it would be so easy to get certain copies, because how far are the 90s? Really? They're really far, apparently. That's that I found out about that. But so this is a current project that we're working on right now, which we're going to launch beginning of April. And one other topic that I would want to just tell you about that we're working on that we think is super important is another series we do, which is called Is This Our Last Chance? So this is another program that highlights climate change as it seems the end of the world is coming quite soon. And I think it's a good idea to watch films before the world ends, but then it's also important to sort of probably try to provoke people. And there are some incredibly provocative films and pieces out there to inform people. And I think this is one of the greatest platforms that we can use, programming, to, give people the sort of the spirit to do something about it. And that's one of the most exciting things, I think, about programming. So I think this intro from my end is good, or...
I have one follow-up question, because it sounds like you have a really widespread range of different programs going on at the same time. And I was wondering about the actual staff structures. How do you decide? Is it like a big team? Because as we're talking about collective decision-making, how does it come about? Yeah.
Yes. We do have a programmers team, so our programming team can do exhibitions as well as public programs. So there's a whole diverse range in there, and it is a collective thing, really. I mean, it's sort of similar to how you have a collective spirit in filmmaking, because it's difficult. I mean, there are things you can do on your own in your corner, but it really doesn't have much of an impact. And the best thing is to have other opinions and diverse backgrounds. Like our team, not everybody's an art historian, for example. So my specialty is film and video, but we have an anthropologist, a political scientist, a culture arts manager, for example. So it brings in completely different perspectives, and I think it's always crucial to have an open discussion about this. So basically, we do kind of operate on that, although some projects will have a leader, for example, just to guide the way. So we have ultimately somebody saying, okay, let's do this, if there's a certain discussion that can never end. But mostly, we try to, And of course there's a reality of it that comes into play. I mean, then there's the fun part, and then there's the non-fun part. The non-fun part is the logistics, the money, all the stuff that you don't really want to talk about at all. But so that comes into play as well as a team, I think.
Thank you. I think there were a lot of things that we will come back to later, but
Fantastic.
maybe we go on and move on to Claire. Current projects that you're working on, how are they related to programming? I guess most of your projects are related to programming, and how are they also related to collective works and approaches? Yeah.
So, hello everyone. Same thing, various projects. So we are going on print with the next Hour Télé, number 15. This is a film critic magazine. I co-founded in 2015, bilingual French and English with some African film critics on the continent. So we think collective because we have various film critics on the continent, and we have a board. We are 3, 2 women, 1 man. The man is based in France, the woman is based in Nigeria, and I'm in between. So we are between French and the English-speaking zones, and we decide collectively what topics we will talk about. So this is the journalist part. So this 15 issue will be on women. And then the Directors Fortnight Selection Committee is in Cannes. It was created in 1968, for the ones of you who don't know that. It was created in reaction to the official selection of the Cannes Film Festival, which was mainly for a long time run by, let's say, diplomatic representation from different countries around the world. So every country choose or pick the films they wanted to represent their country in Cannes, and then you had a kind of diplomatic selection. And in 1968, few filmmakers were a little bit angry about the selection and thought that there were many filmmakers that should be represented in Cannes. So this is how the Directors Fortnight was born, and it's managed by the Société des Réalisateurs de Film, which defend filmmakers in France. So it's run by a non-profit organization. It's absolutely not funded by the Cannes Film Festival. And along this selection, there's another one called the Critics Week, which is run by the National French Film Critic Organization, Syndicat. And they only select first and second feature. I do the different things because sometimes people apply and they think that because they apply to Directors Fortnight, their film will go directly to all the selection. It's not true. If you want to apply for Directors Fortnight, you have to apply there. If you want to apply for Critics Week, you have to apply on their website. And for Cannes Film Festival, you have to apply as well. So regarding Directors Fortnight, we accept first, second, third, 15 film that you've made. No, there is no, let's say, first or second film appearance for us. It's a new committee. The new delegate is an Italian programmer called Paolo Moretti, and we are 5 persons in the selection committee, and we are right in the middle of the selection process, as we will complete it end of April. So if you have short films, you can apply until March 13th, and if you have features, you can apply until March 27th. And I think it's really interesting, the discussion we have, because it's also a new collective of selection committee. We are thinking a lot about what do we want to represent in terms of cinema in Cannes in 2020, and we had the same question in 2019. So we open up a lot to visual artists to see who's challenging cinema narratives. Why do you use image and sound nowadays to make a film? Because many people can make a statement, they can write an article, they can, I don't know, make a painting. So why do you make a film? And what will make the difference? And why do we have to think that you're gonna change something in terms of cinema in the next few years? I think this is the place for the Directors Fortnight. So regarding the last year short film selection, for example, we had many visual artists, we had many filmmakers who never came to Cannes, and we even opened the floor to Laurie Anderson, who made a virtual reality installation. So yes, we think a lot about how to open all these possibilities. And regarding my other side as distributor with Studio Connection, we focus on Pan-African films, or films from Africa and its diaspora. And we are right now completing the selection of our 6th season of Quartier Lointain, which is a short film touring program I created in 2013. So it's a short film selection, the length of a feature film that is touring during 1 year between France, the United States, and some African countries. 1 year we focus on African filmmakers, 1 year from filmmakers from the African diaspora based in Europe, or mainly in France. And this year it will be an African season, and we will focus on Afrofuturism. Not because it's a trend that everyone wants to use regarding Black Panther or whatever, but we really want to promote what are the ideas from the filmmakers from the continent, what they want to depict in terms of sci-fi, in terms of narratives, in terms even in documentary, not necessarily fiction. And each year we have an ambassador, and this year we make the first move to go to an artist who's not necessarily a filmmaker. She was first known as a designer. Her name is Célie Rabican. She's based in Senegal, in Dakar. She's renowned for her Afrofuturistic dresses and stylist design. And she moved to the virtual reality. She was produced by the South African producer Steven Markowitz, and I think it's really interesting to interact, as you said earlier, not only with the film industry in itself, but also with other artists who also look at films and have their own reflection and creation. And regarding Quartier Lointain, I do the programming myself, but then we have an entire crew in terms of graphism, editing, and then programming to call every place to book some screenings. So it's not necessarily regarding programming the films. Of course, my colleague watched the films as well, and we discuss what we think. And nowadays, we definitely have to think about women filmmakers and a mix of documentary and fiction. But we are really open. There is no call for films, and we are not putting some year of production restriction like we do. For example, with Directors Fortnight, you have to apply with films directed in 2019 or 2020. So you cannot apply with the 2018 or 17 films. But regarding Quartier Lointain, as we have a topic, then the research is more about what do we want to represent from the continent regarding this topic. So we are really open, and we can put some films from 2014 or 2013 if we think that is important, and if we think that the general audience, not the film festival goers, have not watched the film.
Wow, thank you. There was a lot, and it's super interesting, no, in a good sense, because it's super interesting how you cover the different ends of distribution and selection criteria, having the critics' perspective and the magazine on one hand, being in selection committees yourself, and then if it comes to the promotion of Pan-African films, it's also something that can influence selection criteria at other ends. So this is maybe something we can talk about too, is how are selection criteria influenced, what are the parameters, where do we change and challenge things, and where do other initiatives challenge us in our decision making. And then the other thing that you tackled is, if you say you have this Pan-African Film Critics magazine and you have people from all over working on these different editions, you have spontaneous or temporary collective efforts in also promoting one common cause and ideas. So this is also something that I would like to talk about later when it comes to the political layer and aspect of collective work. So thank you for sharing. Maria, so you're currently working for the Berlin Biennale, but maybe you want to tell us also about your own collective, the Chilean one, and your perspective on what has been thrown into the room so far.
Thank you. Yeah, well, right now I'm currently one of 4 curators of the Berlin Biennale. 3 of us are women from Latin America, and that makes us very happy, and we feel that that's actually quite an important part of the project itself. And with the, I guess if you ask me about collective work, I mean, teams are always collective somehow, and I guess the cinema world has been a little bit more transparent about the collective work behind what occurs, what is behind the name of the director. They're all credited, whereas in the art world, this is actually rarely the case. For me, this has a lot to do with the market. They need these names, they need to sell these works, and the collective work behind a lot of these individual works is very often not only hidden, but even like there's contracts to explicitly hide this, which is extremely strange. But not so if you follow the market logic. And in that sense, I guess my own work has been oscillating my whole life between very sort of, you could say, grassroots, not out of some kind of wanting to hold a banner, but really just out of a necessity of doing self-organized things. In Chile also, and most usually those self-organized practices that are collaborative have to do with creating a context, with the need for creating your own context somehow. And but I've oscillated also working with bigger institutions that are always, of course, big teams. And for me, it's been such an amazing learning experience to have one foot in both of those worlds. It's very helpful in terms of that. For me, it's very clear and obvious that no matter how individually we work, there's always a collective intelligence and a learning community behind that. So for me, this like calling things collective or not will never change that. It's more about like acknowledging that. Also in Copenhagen, in the house, in the flat that I live with my partner, the artist Jacob Jacobsen, he's running self-organized projects such as the Hospital Prison University Archive, which is a radio station, and now the Hospital for Self-Medication. And because it's so much a part of our reproductive space, I also see this very much as a collaborative work, not only with me, but with the whole community. So it's very much a part of my everyday life. And for me, it's a very important part of what I bring into when I work also in an institution. And the current project, the Biennale project, which I would say means that now these other collaborative self-run projects are going on without me, which is perfectly fine because that's how they should be. It should always be possible for one individual to escape that or to leave that. I guess there's a lot of the things that we are working on that has to do with acknowledging these learning communities, which I must add also for me has to do with teaching. I mean, I get so much from teaching and the groups of students that I've worked with. So within the biennial, we really try to open up this curatorial process, not only by naming the four of us, by eliminating this idea of the head curator with this little team behind that is like providing ideas, when actually it's obvious that we are all contributing to the project in very different terms, but also in terms that are equally relevant. And opening up that curatorial process by opening the biennial 9 months before, and doing what we have called experiences, which are basically exhibitions, but they're also pretty much a setup for different kinds of encounters. In this sense, this notion of exhibition making for us has very much to do with creating spaces of mutual exposure, of encountering each other and the unexpected results of what that means. And that's actually been a little bit hard to defend, not because anybody is against it, but just because it's much more difficult to do it in that way than to just one person making these decisions and putting things out front. Yeah, and I think that for us, this also has to do with trying to use this very this very rigid framework of what a biennial is, which is 2 years of work and 3 months of an exhibition, and trying to open that up a little bit and force some kind of sustainability into those relations, which is for us very, very important, even though it's a pretty big challenge to do it within that framework of time. Maybe I'll leave it there, and some of those things can be followed up later.
Thank you. I can also see a parallel because you mentioned, I'm thinking of the site-specific aspect of work and of curatorial work, and if you say opening up a process and opening up a space and seeing the process more as something where you contextualize and enable encounters, and then it's not as outcome-oriented. It also makes me think of what you said about SALT and Thursday thing with the city and the urban structures, and it also relates to what we do a lot in intervening in public space. And what I've been wondering about, if you talk about the difference in between the self-organized structures and then the institutionalized ones, and also about how the artwork is maybe better, the art world is maybe better in hiding and in erasing collective efforts and hiding them behind names. I think the film industry does that as well, but maybe not as radical, or maybe more subtle, but it definitely happens there too, I feel. But I was wondering how the power relations and how challenging power relations in place within institutionalized structures is an effort one can take collectively, especially if you say if collective work and practice is not something you relate to only in your work, but in your concept of living, for example, or if you kind of dissolve or make those borders more porous. Maybe you want to take on that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I guess one thing that it should be clear, we, like in the biennial, we are not a collective. We are 4 people working together. We're collaborating. And it's just maybe because of the collective sort of themes that many institutions have put forward that we have kind of been framed like that. But we're definitely not, because being a collective is very different. It means you already have some methods of working together. You already have, and we had to, that is a part of this building these sustainable relations, is building them with each other and figuring out how that will work, which is a little bit even more crazy than already having been a collective. And for me, that's just important to, because I don't want to claim that we are a collective. But for me, one of the main and really most important differences in terms of self-run collectives or working in a self-run collective way and working in an institutional way is very much accountability. Like, your accountability is pretty radically another one. And you cannot run an institution like a self-run kiosk. You cannot ask people to work in the same way where, in a way, in self-organized initiatives, it's very often for very little money, and that's already complicated to cope with in that group, but you could never, ever ask people to work like that in a different kind of context. But also, of course, in terms of decision-making, and I think that accountability also has to do with, being responsible for your role. Like, no matter, of course, I think somebody at one point said, working horizontally doesn't mean that you're like on a plane and everybody lies down. Of course, there are different kinds of roles, and I think you have to be accountable for those roles. You have to take care of what you're doing in those roles and the people that are working around you.
But would it be something one could aim for to institutions to learn from those multi-layered horizontal structures that are also, as Fatma said before, often you have different expertises that come together and then create value in a way in comparison to very steep structures. Just as an idea. Yeah.
I mean, I also don't want to say that self-organized collectives are not accountable. Of course they are, absolutely. But it's it's different. They're accountable to each other and to that context that they're creating, not to their employees or to their public or to the funding that they're getting. But yeah, I would say, just to be like super honest, what I learned from working in that way was to not just fall apart with a problem. I mean, that was for me, I remember when I first started working in Europe in my 20s, and my colleagues would freak out over something, and I was just like, okay, that's just a problem, and we solve it. And they're like, it's so unprofessional, what are we gonna do? And it was like such a huge crisis. And for me, this was, I don't know, normal. We could just, problems are there to be fixed and not to melt down because it's not done. The problem was not formulated in this way that is expected. So, and that was for me actually a huge asset, because I was able to just stand there when everybody else fell apart because something was not as they needed it to be, or formulated or articulated in the way that it needed to be for them to understand it. And for me, this was super okay. I don't know, I was used to institutions being like weird hostels that you could occupy and leave according to when it was needed. And in that sense, that porosity allowed me to navigate conflicts, I would say, I wouldn't say in a better way, but at least didn't make me melt down when they appeared.
There's a certain resilience, I guess, that goes along with being used to those processes and process-oriented structures also, no? And more flexible Buddhists. The introductory text says that we do challenge and rewrite selection criteria. It feels like a bit heavy on our shoulders. Do we really rewrite? And what do we want to rewrite when it comes to, we all in our work do obviously challenge patriarchal, Eurocentristic, racist, classist, enablest ideas, structures, and power mechanisms in place in our industries and also in the institutions that we work in. But can we rewrite those being still part and players of the system? And if so, what direction do we want to write them into? Maybe Fatma, you want to start again?
I'll give it a try. So it's quite interesting when we talk about institutional politics, and when it sometimes feel like these institutions are a third entity or something else, but then you come to realize that actually institutions are made of people. And there's this incredible core thing about that, I think, foundational, that actually it's not this enigmatic, maybe it sounds like this out of this world kind of entity when we talk about that, but then again it's truly people and their attitudes and the ideas that come with that. So and I have to say, your personal attitude is so much of a big part of this as well, even though, the internet tells us to keep the professional life and the private life separate, but we all know that how much of these collide into one another and how much it reflects upon any sort of work we do. Especially, I feel like when you're coming from a place where there's a political and social heaviness and a caution that has to come along with that. It's a little tricky, and then you start realizing how there are certain nuances and certain things that you have to be aware of, and that even though you thought maybe sky is the limit, actually there is a limit to certain things, and you have to be cautious of this in order for you to carry on doing your other things, by the way. So even though, it's not necessarily Alice in Wonderland, because at one point I thought life could be like Alice in Wonderland, and then you realize it's not. And then you have to you learn to be diplomatic, and how much diplomacy actually is a part of, and how much of a two-way thing this is, that you have to give in, to give out. But then also try to protect the integrity of the work you're doing, the programming, the content, and try to keep and the most important thing, I think, is collaborators. That's what makes, I think, institutions, and especially SALT, even though we do have a team, we do have a lot of constituents and collaborators we work with that actually define the institution's own institutional approach, let's say. I don't know if that makes sense, but so it's a little tricky, I think, and so it can be, and it's when you live in a place where automatically each day your political and social agenda can change overnight, you do become, I don't want to say paranoid, because that's bad to be paranoid all the time, but to have an occasional paranoia, which can lead to, and then we can go into obviously censorship and all that, which are also complicated things, but it comes within this whole institutional heaviness, especially if you're funded by another institution, let's say. So these are all the sort of dynamics that come into play that we have to consider, I think.
And within those dynamics, how do you then define your premises on curation and programming? Because, as you say, they're very dynamic and changing all the time. What is the core that you work from? So
I think that there's truly an idea or something to be researched, a critique, a research, something that you want to put forward. And, of course, the ideal situation is not to have that process or phase not be sabotaged by another idea or thing, but there have been times in my life where, I've this was in another institution I worked at, but by programming queer shorts, I was told not to show them, for example, by the municipality. At that time, but before that, I had shown several different queer content, etc. So these are little weird adventures that you learn to take on your shoulders, and then now I know how to be. You find different ways, basically. This is the kind of cool thing about pressure, is that it sort of does not. You try to open up that good door of like, okay, if this is not possible, then what could be possible? And kind of find new solutions and, in a sense, be creative, which is not ideal, obviously. But then again, we're living in this world right now where it's impossible not to talk about the bizarre normalization of this far-right situation, right? So, and it really is heavy, and the more that it's happening, the more you kind of want to counter that and say, hey, no. But it's tricky. So it's also about coming up with different strategies and reaction to... And sort of, just like we are here now, being spontaneous, you have to be spontaneous at the same time, I think, and be ready for, it rains and you have to not try to get wet, basically. Oh, what a metaphor.
Thank you. Claire, rewriting selection criteria, especially in film and festival work. You have a quite clear agenda also with Pan-African film, but how do you feel about the influence, as we mentioned before, of, for example, promoting and distributing film, and how does that affect festival selection in general?
Yeah, and even regarding what my colleague said, which is really interesting, I realize that, like in the professional world, you have people who used to work in companies. Like they want to have a chief and they want to respect the rules, and you have to go through so many people to have your final answers. And regarding film festivals, sometimes it works like that. Yeah, like you have a family business, like no one out of the family will run the festival, for example, and all the others just are there and they're afraid of the situation, but no one will change nothing. You have other film festivals like run kind of nationally with national funds, so they are tied with all the government policies and whatever partner they want. So I used to see, regarding what you said, like Pan-African films and whatever, that many programmers are not traveling, they're not going abroad, or they're not curious, or they will only travel for an agenda, so because they are inviting to make a political statement or whatever, or because there is a long-term partnership between this festival and this country or this other film festival. And so in this landscape, I think that collectives are really more interesting because maybe they are focusing more on films than in the structure of what is the company running the film festival and what does it mean to have your logo behind you and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And yes, regarding the African films and films from the diaspora, I think that nowadays we see the difference now that, like, let's say women stood up and you have the 50-50 agenda now for every kind of film festivals. They have to sign this agreement and say, okay, we will put women on board, we will put women programmers and whatever. But I don't see it in other levels. So maybe it's the first step, but I think maybe one day we will have pressure from, let's say, non-European filmmakers or non-white filmmakers or, I don't know, non-heterosexual filmmakers requesting to be, to see themselves on screen. Because, yes, the film industry is mainly European and mainly white and a lot of men, but there are a lot of other filmmakers and proposals from the entire world. So yes, regarding African films, I can say that I met many, many programmers who are just happy to find a person who knows people and who can recommend films or filmmakers regarding the criteria they have, because I don't know if people are afraid of the continent. I don't know if it's because plane tickets are expensive, but yeah, I don't see so many programmers traveling on the continent, watching films, looking for new content. So nowadays the current situation is each film festival has its African representative. So they are the one dedicated to travel to this film festival and to scout the next project. And happily we have places or platforms like Berlinale Talent or Durban Talent in South Africa, where those filmmakers or producers or scriptwriters can attend and be the next or the upcoming talents that filmmakers can follow. Because there's, I'm just coming back from Ghana, and I was really surprised how the film industry worked in itself. They were not going out of the country, except maybe Nigeria, or looking for UK or the United States, because there is a strong Ghanaian diaspora over there. And I was really surprised. They didn't really know the film festival circuit. They didn't know that there were labs, and they were there with films. But they didn't know what to do with these films. Like, who can I reach? To which door should I knock? And especially now that we have internet, we have platforms. Sometimes people just put the film on YouTube and they believe that that's it, we complete it, watch it. But they don't think about the commercial issues and the A-list criteria, like your film should not be screened prior to the festival selection. So yes, I can say maybe there's a lack of interest or curiousness, but nowadays everyone is talking about Africa, so I think that right now there's an interest, but I hope it will stay. It will be more than a few years. And yes, I definitely believe that it's important to confront yourself to different structure of companies or way of working together, because nothing is eternal, and maybe a collective work, and then suddenly you have to work in a company. But then sometimes when I work in a company where you have to ask one question and have 15 emails because no one will know who has to answer, and suddenly someone has the answer and you're like, oh my God, why? Why is it so complicated? So I think maybe it's a gift nowadays to know how to run many things at the same time. I know it frightened many people as well, like, oh my God, she's doing this, it's too much. But at the same time, well, we are on our own, and I think filmmakers more than everyone else know that you are the chief, you have to manage a team, you have to find your producer, and sometimes even when you have your producer, you still have to raise the money or deal with them or reread the deals because you don't really know what's happening behind you. And it's a life of networks, so you have to develop all your skills and and trust the others, because I think that many situation of loneliness and whatever is also because we don't trust each other. We're afraid of this one will cheat on me, or they will steal my idea. Of course, everyone wants to steal, and people are staying back, seeing if it works for you, then they will jump in. So, well, I think we are not inventing anything. It has been previously, but maybe we have to reinvent how to manage our path in this field.
Yeah, I think it's interesting if you mention, for example, when it comes to festivals and quotas, and also selection criteria that is influenced by company structures, by sponsors, by funds from municipality, but also, for example, Creative Europe that limits, or that it doesn't limit, but it does define a certain percentage of European films that have to be included into a festival, and what does it do when it comes to the question of representation, for example. And what I wonder is if we talk, for example, about quota, or about the fact that certain industries are quite closed off. If you refer to Ghana, for example, that the distribution infrastructure, the global distribution infrastructure is very much focused on Euros and on the United States. And for the moment, I oftentimes have the feeling that there's content coming from the continent that is produced for the European and for the American market. And in a way, I think it's super important that there is a change in representation within the international festivals, and also a change of programmers actually going to places and not having stuff always brought to them. I think this is also a political aspect that one could talk about, that where do these labs take place, where do the co-pro markets take place, and it's oftentimes European producers waiting for stuff to brought towards them. And then there's a question of this really thin line in between representation and tokenism in a way also, and obviously we need this period of change and transgression where we talk about quotas and where we facilitate those, but can we at one point maybe move into the other direction, and if so, how? I know that's a really big question, but it's something that I'm wondering about a lot when it comes to the Pan-African and diasporic, also interconnectedness, where people now go back and forth, and where new infrastructures are emerging in all kinds of places. As you say, there's an interest from the outside, but also on location, there is a lot of things happening when you talk about Ghana, when you talk about Senegal, when you talk about Mali, for example. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's changing because right now we have, if we talk about the African continent, we have film schools on the continent, we have few labs, we have some funds as well, some countries support their own cinema. But then yet, reaching the international level or international film circuits, it's quite complicating. I don't know how is it regarding to Asia or Latin America, but it's each time you have someone coming from Europe or the United States, they are the one on stage. So you never have the situation where they will be the one sitting in the room and the local filmmakers or producers or film professionals will be the one speaking. And I think it's still a problem because it means that you have the knowledge from abroad, you bring the knowledge on the continent, and so wherever you are, abroad or on the continent, you are the one with the knowledge. And it's not true, because sometimes if it's not working, it's maybe also because it is not the way it works locally. And I think we have a lack of perspective on what's working there, what's working outside. Many films that have success abroad, as you said, are co-produced by European film producers or international companies. So they are not reaching the same audience when they are screened on the continent. And local films have no success in film festival. They will be even rejected on the first watch, you know, like, oh no, this is not all criteria. So what does it mean? And how can you make voice emerge from the continent if they are not fitting the criteria that film festivals are looking for? So this is something really weird, but it's a situation that we are facing at the moment. And I don't remember the other part of the question.
I think it was about the influence taken also by company-structured festivals, but I wanna go into that a bit more deep. If you say that that the selection criteria doesn't fit the structure of the narratives, for example, or the distribution criteria that are valid for a European and an US American context do not fit the distribution possibilities and mechanisms on the continent. Maybe if we talk about how we could rewrite selection criteria and how we could rewrite criteria in general, one strategy might be diversifying the range of narratives and also maybe formal structures and being more open to those, and also to come up with alternative mechanisms of distribution. And also if it comes to production output, I think film festivals often focus on very recent works. There's this whole premiere logic that is slowly broken open and broken apart, but it's still very much in place. And if you have places that don't have such a high production output, it might be maybe a good idea to question those mechanisms and just come up with new and alternative mechanisms of distribution. And as you say, the knowledge doesn't always have to come from the already established one, but if you take into consideration concepts and ideas that are already in place, you could diversify the whole industry in a way. Yeah.
I think that I always quote a film that has been screened in Berlinale. A few years ago, I met the filmmakers at the Final Cut Venice, which is a post-production grant made by the Mostra di Venezia in Italy. And so you present your film in the stage of post-production, and you have a discussion with a jury, and then they offer awards. So at the time it was the first edition, and you had some post-production companies, you had some labs, funders, and whatever. And one film from South Africa really shocked us. We were, wow, in the seat, and I was like so surprised and happily surprised, like, oh my God, this is possible. Because it's like someone expressing himself, really believing in what he's saying, and just a really interesting proposal. And there were only 3 awards and 4 films selected. The 3 other films were already supported by sponsors, and he came alone with, he was unknown, the producer was unknown, and it just came from South Africa. And when there was the ceremony, everyone received an award except him. And for me, he was the best project. And I saw the guy running out of the room, and he disappeared for one day. We didn't know where he were. He broke with his producer, like, I don't know what happened in his mind. And I wrote to him, like, man, if you don't believe in you, I do. And you have to complete this film, because this is amazing. And he was silent for many time. And then one day he appeared at Berlinale. His name is Sipshongwe Lamer. He directed Nekti Youth. And he was after in Tribeca, and he had a really successful career with his film. He had another producer, and he completed it, and all the film programmers were really astonished by his film, because it was a really strong proposal. But when I discussed with one of the jury members, one who had a post-production company, I asked, why didn't you give an award to this filmmaker? And he was like, well, I wanted to give one, but I saw that no one will give him something. So I decided to give my award to someone else. So it's also, we have to think, okay, this is art, but this is also industry. And it's all this situation of following the others. And sometimes, well, I really respect the one who try to trust people. I mean, films that are coming from the guts, of course, maybe they don't have enough money, they're not, facing the same opportunities than others who have been in the entire circuit with film writing grants and then production grants and maybe post-production grants. But I think it's in our position, like selection, programming, that we have to take care of this diversity of proposal, and not only the one who had the label on screen. I also worked a book about French filmmakers with a double culture. So most of them are coming from an African background, and they are not coming from cinema families. They're really new in the film industry. And one of them, he worked for 9 years on his feature film, and no one believed in him, no one gave him money, and he ended at the Directors' Fortnight back in 2012. And when his team came to Cannes, because they all came to Cannes and they had to pay all the tickets because they don't invite the entire crew. Be ready, prepare your money. Sometimes they invite 1 or 2 persons of your crew, but then the other, they come on their own. So when they screened for the first time his film, they saw credits of companies that were never there during the shooting or the post-production moment. They just appeared because the film was selected in Cannes. And he had a lot of fights with his team who believed that he signed contracts and deals and received money and he didn't share with them. And it's not true. I saw so many filmmakers like in Cannes drinking beers in really poor bars and saying, this is Cannes? But we think it's, you're there. Of course, it opens the door to you, but the moment you're there, it's not necessarily the moment that you receive the money you will get with your film. So it's all this tricky, because the industry is lying a lot and we see all this shining thing, but I know you work in the field, so you know it. It's really hard, and sometimes when you watch 10 years later, you don't see the same people that you see 10 years earlier. Everyone had dreams, but then people stop and just do other jobs. So it just, be strong, because it's a really complicated thing. And suddenly you don't know. Some films you don't really believe in, then suddenly they're doing a world tour and everyone wants it. So it's a really surprising, I don't know how it navigates.
But you say festival circles are also closed off. It's not only the production circles where you have one producer on board and then you have the second and third and fourth coming in and the money coming in, but it's also within selection criteria, because if you have the B festivals or maybe the more theme specific, you have this reference, this was played in Berlinale and it has a premiere there and now it has a local premiere. So this also reproduces a kind of exclusive
And
thing.
I wanted to add something. Take time to read all the film festival criteria, because they have rules for that, just to tell you that if they request a square, don't send a circle, because I see so many people applying with the wrong films. It's like, your film is good, but it's not for us. You should apply to this other platform. So just take time. Of course, you want to try all the time. Like, okay, I apply everywhere and I will see. But maybe you will take time just to read the rules and apply to the good festival that is open to you. Like, don't apply with a short to a feature film competition. Don't apply. It looks
it
like
helps a lot.
No, but sometimes people are just okay. I apply everywhere, and luckily it will work. No, just take time, read the rules. You have things for everything. Experimental films, you have things. Women films, you have this. Children films, you have this. It's good for that. If you don't fit for Berlinale, for example, maybe you will fit for Cannes. And if you don't fit for Cannes, maybe you fit for Locarno. If you don't fit for Locarno, maybe for Venice. If not Venice, maybe Toronto. So there are film festivals all year round. So it's just a strategy. And usually this is what the sales agent or distributor do for you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very good practical advice, I think. And we've all seen interesting submissions to sections that were kind of unfitting, I think. But yeah, it goes along with submission fees and so on. So you save yourself a lot of time and effort in doing so. To move on into the discussion, I would like to tackle something that also you mentioned before, which is opening up towards visual arts, and that's the constellation today is here, and we're kind of working in this really wide range, from visual art to site-specific art to curating within the art industry, also called art world, and then the classical film industry. And we had talked before, and we mentioned that oftentimes the film industry is very closed off when it comes to multidisciplinary approaches, whereas the art world obviously is much more used to working on the intersection of research, of archive, and then taking in other industries and ideas and schools. How do you feel about that in your practice, and how does it come together? Because you said before, you're working as a sociologist, you're working with art, you've still always been working with film, even though that's not your background. What do you draw from this very blurry or fluid lines, as you described them before?
Well, I guess I'm kind of an ex-sociologist, so I've been working for many, and maybe that has to do with that blurriness. Maybe studying sociology to me very early on seemed like then I didn't have to make these specialization choices in the curriculum. It seemed that there was like almost everything, so it was just a kind of continuation. And funnily, it was actually between sociology and film school. Yeah, I mean, what I was saying before was that I felt that this invisibilization of collective work also happens to people that have a more fluid practice. And I know many really amazing women artists that are doing different things, but that people, because they can't really classify them, they just become confused and are like, oh, she does poetry, she does performance, she's also in music and does visuals. It's too confusing. We don't understand this. It doesn't fit in our little boxes. But I think that also, again, has a lot to do with funding. At some points, I feel that there's also, like, there's so precarious funding that even the actors of those disciplines are a little bit like, don't come here, we don't want to share our applications with you. But I feel that that's actually very damaging in terms of this learning community. I think it's really important to be able to move across those lines. And maybe that's, for me, it's still very much like that. I'm not like if you bring dance in or theater in, you collapse the whole system because the whole financial background of that is totally different. The whole way you produce this is totally different. But I think it's really, really important to insist in the alliances between these languages. So I think in that sense, for me, what's really important is the project itself, like a little bit what you were saying in the end, and maybe linking to what you said about institutions. Like I don't feel like there's this very famous José Martí, who was an independence fighter for the Cuban, not the revolution, but independence, and he would always say, like, I've been in the gut of the monster and I understand it. And when I work in institutions, I don't feel like that. I'm there because I believe in the project. It's not like some kind of weird, and because it makes projects possible sometimes, projects that otherwise would just be impossible in other contexts. So, yeah.
So you mean also that institutions can facilitate space and context for those multidisciplinary approaches? Because often, I've made the experience that even houses or institutions or art spaces, not saying institutions in a bad way, like the mean third entity, but some places that provide space and also receive funding oftentimes have problems if they don't define themselves as an exhibition space or as a cinema, or as soon as you're on the intersection of, for example, cinema and performance. There's one specific case in Vienna, for example. The funding institutions don't really know what to do with you. It's an alien, and this is a very obvious link there. The moment you go even further, it becomes even more complicated. But Claire, you also mentioned that now the festivals that have been closed off for a long time are opening up to visual artists and to installations. And I mean, obviously, Berlinale has a long history and practice to it, with Forum Expanded, and but also with virtual reality coming in performance. Do you feel it's something happening also on a larger scale? And do you think it's something that we should aim for on a larger scale if it comes to film festival programming and curation?
I think we open more and more because film festivals are always looking for new voices, new filmmakers, new talents, new narratives, new storytelling. So yes, experimental films are having more and more interesting proposals in terms of narrative, in terms of use of sound and image, and virtual reality. Well, it's a fact. It's been a few years that everyone is funding this, so now we have more and more proposals, even if it's really expensive. I don't know if it's a large scale, but I think that many filmmakers now are coming from other backgrounds than only film, and that's really interesting. You have photographers, you have painters, you have, I don't know, really different artistic backgrounds that I guess nourish the art, and cinema is not the seventh art for nothing. It's a mix of many art, and it's really interesting. If you think about Lemohang Jeremiah Mosese, filmmaker from Lesotho, he's here as a jury member this year. He was there last year with a feature film. He just won an award in Sundance, and he is this kind of visual artist who has something really strong, a really strong voice in terms of art proposal. And I think this is really good. It's a good moment, and we should not feel ashamed, like, oh, I didn't go to film school, so I should not be a filmmaker. That's not true. Oh, I don't know anyone in the film industry, so I should not make a film. This is not true. So we are looking for these voices, and maybe it will take years to discover you, or maybe it will be right now. But it's as I say, it's a long journey. But I think that's. It's a big fight. I mean, you have the film festival circuit, like international, which is not requesting any, let's say, criterias. And then you have the A-list festivals. And the A-list festivals are fighting to each other to have the next new Martin Scorsese, the next new Lemohang Jeremiah Mosese. It's like, we want to be the first. So it's not for nothing that you have labs now, because you have now film festivals are even looking for scripts to follow you from the really beginning and say, oh, we were the one who scooped this guy when he was writing the script. So sometimes you even have fights because the guy was developing the script with this festival, but he made this premiere with this other festival.
But that's, again, very market-dominated, no? It's very much more dominated by a market logic, because if I take up the thought that you mentioned before, that it's also about creating spaces of encounter and of process. We could, for example, question with now virtual reality and forms of extended cinemas coming in, this really strong focus on the audiovisual, and maybe just extend the whole experience of festival if you think it radically, and then we might not be in this concurrent thing of reproducing each other's also focus all the time and fighting for the same people. But that's really just a thought that came into my mind, and maybe Fatma, you want to add to it, because you kind of bridge those two disciplines so well in also your experience.
Just a small comment that I think, I know that there is this comparison between like the film world and the art world, and it sounds like the art world is slightly better than the film world, but come again, I think the art world has been incredibly conservative when you think about the 20th century, right? I mean, it's called plastic arts. I mean, it's taken them ages for them to recognize that actually moving images and then beyond that and what it can be is actually accepted as art. I mean, now we look upon, and now a lot of maybe avant-garde and experimental stuff that were incredibly marginalized back in the day are now like, and we're like, now they're popular, and you know, you have performance artists, they're like now super famous, and I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not saying, but I'm just stating. So that also adds a different dynamic, and I feel like maybe both angles are now realizing, just to what you were saying about these people who are doing anything are coming from incredibly different backgrounds. So that says something, and I think there has to be, because this classification is interesting as well, right? We want to classify things like, so is it a comedy? Is it a horror? Because I'm going to accordingly arrange my laughter or scare while watching, as if, you know, but now there are so many genre bending, just like gender bender, but the genres are bending. A lot of, I think, the transdisciplinary thing is now talk of the century, actually. For me, like the 21st century's most exciting part is that you have all these different disciplines actually coming together and becoming aware of each other. Now you're talking about film festivals, like showing VR work and having, you know, maybe more experimental or maybe more works that were back in the day associated with the cube, the white cube, the gallery space, and crossovers. Now you have museums, cultural institutions, screenings and underlining and finally accepting that cinema is an art, you know, like, so it's I think it's a lengthy road, and as you said, we're going to witness, I think, more and more of these crossovers, and I think it has to be more gray, and it's not, if that makes sense. So that's the good part, I think, that we're going to be seeing more and more of each other, and it's not as like, oh, you're a film person, and it's...
So it's also about creating contexts where those encounters, those hybridities are possible, further than just showing we are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just to also, as festivals, as spaces, as places to enable those encounters, and maybe drop the boxes. I'd like to include you into our discussion. There's an audience mic that can be thrown around. It's a blue little cube, and there's a question
it's
there.
It's crossover. It's a square mic.
Wow. So my question goes in the direction of stuff you've already said about the curation and reaching out to talent. So I was wondering, in your different practices, because you were already talking about like traveling to Ghana, for example, and people not really knowing that you can apply to film festivals. So I was wondering how much of your curatorial work is actually dealing with the things that are submitted. Like, I don't know if they're, in your case, I know there's submission, I don't know in your cases how it works, and how much is actually like reaching out, and how can you reach out to see these films beyond traveling to places? Because I know I saw some interviews with people who said they're looking for certain hashtags on social media or something. So how can you expand your network, and especially if you maybe work in a smaller festival where maybe you don't have the means to travel all the time? For general, whoever thinks they have a...
Well, just quickly then, it's interesting. Yeah, I didn't mention that, but okay. So the programmings we do obviously are not like, we don't have submissions. So I like to play like Sherlock Holmes and you know, like investigate, and I like that. I prefer to find little gems that are not visible at all or haven't been able to meet an audience. And I think that's super critical and important, because I think another question is about the means of distribution is also being questioned in this day and age, maybe. And I think it's maybe easier for certain independent filmmakers to find other ways where you can maybe get around the system of these sales agents, and, you know, it's tricky. Of course, you still have to be part of the system in a sense, but there are these kind of alternative ways that you can explore, and not obviously everybody's, and as you said, like that festival works or this doesn't work and blah, 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 but, and not always all films are picked up, right? The reality of that situation, but it doesn't mean it's not screenable. So I think that's where I feel like our sort of programming has more of a relevance and importance in that aspect, to kind of, and that's the contextualizing framework, which is the fun part. Does that help?
Yeah, where I was coming from, kind of, yes, it does definitely. Where it was coming up from, kind of, is like these talks that have been happening forever about quotas and everything, and then you look at people involved in programming, and the argument, like even here, is that, oh, like of their submissions, only 33% of submitted films, for example, are made by women. Mm-hmm. Oh, and the selection is 38%, so that's progress. And the same with all other sorts of underrepresented films. So I was just wondering, okay, but if maybe there are other reasons for people not submitting, like accessibility or knowledge or whatever, so how does this Sherlock Holmes work? How could you go about, if you want to share it, maybe it's a secret.
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm in a bit of a different situation. Well, with a festival, it's super a grand operation, I feel like, especially if it's a city's grand event and all that. I mean, I have lots of little opportunities to explore. So, and of course, theme-wise, and I mean, so the way we would program is a little bit more different regarding statistics. But I know with festivals, statistics is kind of important, right? And journalists love to talk about. I mean, for example, if you're thinking about asking this question, you don't have to ask me this question, but I was asked, like, so what do you think about no Turkish films being in the main competition?
I think, as you say, it's on one hand, it's about statistics, and then especially bigger festivals aiming for a quite wide range of positions and representations. So that this quota thing comes in, and not only the quota, but also the idea of having this multi-layered thing. From my experience, also working for smaller festivals, not having the means to travel, I think it's also a question of research. But if you're a submission-based festival, it's as simple as really spreading the call wider than just putting it online on your website, but really looking for community and spaces and places, and maybe also collaborators who can spread your call for entries within places that maybe not usually stumble upon your festival or what you do. So it's first of all scouting with the consciousness that there is the stuff on the surface and that is there very easy, and that people will bring stuff to you when they have you in mind, but that there's many people producing beautiful content beyond that, and you somehow have to bring your festival to them or your call to them, or ask them for their works. So what we did a lot is that we collaborated with local arts institutions that we found interesting all over the world, and just asked them to spread our call and asked them to encourage filmmakers and artists to submit their works, and it really changed the qualities of submissions from one year to another. I'm now referring to, I was directing a human rights film festival for 2 years, and we tackled this topic because we had the feeling that obviously at some point distribution companies see you and you get the submissions from the same corners, and it was really an effort that we took on changing the places where the submission come from. And you don't need to travel. Same with research. I mean, sure, it's beautiful to go to markets, and it's beautiful to be in festivals and to immediately and personally connect, but I mean, there's catalogs and you can order them, and there's all these online archives, and it's a matter of digging through. And not only the places that you would maybe easily go to or travel to, but find out about festivals all over the place that you might not have heard about. Yeah. Maybe here and then back there, is that fine?
I would just like to maybe follow up on something that I think is super important, because for me, your question really has to do with this rewriting the selection criteria issue. And for me, that's actually, I totally share with you that the art world is even more conservative. I mean, that's what I meant by that. At least in cinema, there's a recognition of the collective work, and in art, there's still this kind of like little dotted line, like the Discovery Channel, like it started here with this guy and then this guy, and then all we've managed to do is kind of like footnote that a little bit to hold that scaffolding up, when actually it should just be like completely demolished. But and that scaffolding is the same, and it's the basis of the owner, like this kind of ownership of that narrative. So for me, what has to change is that narrative, the way that narrative is articulated, this idea of ownership, this idea of discovering, this idea of the new, because I mean, a lot of this idea of unknown artists or unknown filmmakers, because they're pretty much not unknown in their own context. So for me, this is really something that is very important to challenge all the time, and that is actually, I feel, what we can do. Like, we may not be able to rewrite that narrative, but we can challenge that narrative, and especially we can challenge the way that narrative is articulated, the kind of voices that are allowed to articulate that. And we can say, okay, if you want to talk about these like more vulnerable positions, then you have to hear this more vulnerable way of articulating those voices. And I think that that's super important, and that's what we should be held accountable for, because it's our job. It's not only we are working for that narrative also when we are doing research on these more invisibilized stories, which I also do a lot of research on. It's not because they're undiscovered that I think they're fascinating. It's because they do things that I think are extremely relevant. And so I think that, and I'm the one putting it forward. I'm making that visible somehow. So when I do that, I have to be held accountable for what happens with that, and if it's just going to go end up in the case of the art, like in the vault of some metropolitan museum and be buried there when this fad is over. And then what happens to the context this was made for, where it was supposed to be creating something, it's just completely forgotten, and nobody's holding them accountable for that. And I think that's really, really important to be pushing hard now.
There is also, that goes along very closely, this, as you say, this entitlement to discovery that is very problematic oftentimes, that goes along with it. And maybe if you say we have to challenge the narrative, that is maybe quite key in all the positions that we've been talking about.
Yeah, my question is also about discovering these little gems that you mentioned. I'm not sure how these festival curators really work, because I think that there are lots of submissions, and as far as I understand the process, that you don't watch like 300 films on your own, but you have people that work for you beforehand, like 10 or 20 people. And how do you find those people, and how can you trust their opinion? I mean, how do you make sure that they don't have a completely different taste than you have, and that you still find those gems? And then I have a second question, which is completely different. I just don't understand completely what this market is. Is the market something where people have been sending films to Berlin Festival, for example, and they weren't accepted, but they can still be seen by other festival directors to put them then into Toronto, for example?
You mean the European film market, or the term market that has been stumbling around in our discussion?
I don't even know the difference, to be honest.
I think when I was referring to the market in our discussion, I was referring to the fact that the film industry is structured as a market and obviously follows market logic. No, I mean the market
that is at festivals.
And at festivals, you oftentimes have a market that, maybe Claire, maybe you want to, but it's also about co-productions and things that are emerging, but it's separated from the program. It's not like the B program of a festival.
I know, no, because you can see finished films in the market. Yeah. Just not sure, have they been at other festivals before, or are there films where you could still
No,
discover
as we said earlier, every film festival is scouting films. So you have to scout films at every stage of the conception. So regarding film markets, this is the place where sales agent and distributor can organize screenings and invite other film festival programmers, for example, or other distributors to prepare theatrical release. For example, I come to Berlin with a film, and I know that here there is a Japanese exhibitor. I'm sure my film will have to travel to Japan, so I will organize my screening, be sure that he's coming to my screening, and then maybe sign a deal to make a release over there. So it's not necessarily the film that are screened during the film festival that are in the film market, but added to this, you have other films that are not released during the film festivals that are still in the circuit, let's say. And it's every film market. You have one in America, AFM, you have one in Berlin, you have one in Cannes, you have one in Venice. All these markets are the place where you can know what are the current projects. And I think it's the festival life, festival director's life. It's all year round. It's not necessarily the 4 months prior to the festival. They have to know what film will be ready on time for their selection. Maybe be the first to watch it. Maybe be the first to invite it, because afterward they will sometimes have fight between all the film festivals. Yeah, it's true. You receive 2,000 films, and then at the end everyone fight for maybe 5. Because everyone wants this film, and then it's just pressure.
I think you can really imagine it like a market. You have little booths, and you have people selling products at different stages. There's people, pitching scripts and ideas to producers. There's production companies pitching their content to distributors. There's world sales pitching their program to local distribution companies. Then there's local exhibitors who represent maybe a country and try to promote, let's say, Austrian or Ghanaian film to the world. And then they all meet and mingle and make deals. And it's also a lot about paying money for and transferring money.
And sometimes it's depressing, because you see those people coming for film markets and not watching any films. because they only have meetings, and then dinners, and and you maybe send your, let's come to my screening, oh no, I'm busy, I have a meeting, and then I have a dinner, and then, oh, I'm in my plane, I'm back home, so it's like, oh my God. And sometimes when you attend film industry screening, you have everyone on those phones. They watch film, but then at the same time they're sending emails like, let's confirm the next meeting, and you're like, oh my God, do we really love films?
Yeah, that's
But regarding what you said earlier about the question and the selection criteria, it's like we receive a lot of films, but of course there are, amongst those films, there are films that we have already scouted. Like we know, we have a list of, okay, this guy is on post-production, we should be expecting the film for now, and maybe you contact the production company, are you still editing the film? Can we receive a screener, whatever, will you apply? You know, there's this kind of seduction thing. And regarding what you said earlier as well, there is travel and travel. Sometimes you travel and you don't go out of your hotel, or you just follow, or you will go straight to an office and they will screen films for you. Or there is the travel where you listen to people you meet and you go to their office and you discuss with what's going on, and maybe they will introduce you to someone else, and you know, there are these two different things. And regarding, sorry, because there were many questions, and we have correspondents for some territories, so everyone has to watch, but for Directors for Night, we watch everything. So it's not, they do not have a first row of screenings and then we arrive and we sit and let's watch the other films. No, we do watch everything. And if, for example, I'm interested in a Russian film, then I will ask the correspondent, oh, did you watch this film and what do you think about it? Because I have this feeling, but maybe you know something else about the film and whatever. So it's step by step and it's all collective decision. I know that some film festival, there's only the head of the delegate who will choose every film, and the other committee members has nothing to say. But at the Directors for Night, we all discuss the film and we have all seen the film when they arrive during the festival.
But yeah, I think it really depends, and it's very different from festival to festival. But I think the system of selection committee is quite common, where you have a number of people who actually screen all the submissions, but usually you have a person who coordinates those structures. And as you say, you have either scouts or program advisors who specialize on a certain form or a certain region or whatever expertise they bring in. But if you talk about smaller festivals, for example, there's oftentimes a very small team taking care of the selection, and then there's festivals who challenge the hierarchical structures in general and make it a collective process where everyone who's actually involved in the festival, also people from production or education, are involved in the selection of films. It really depends from project to project. Yeah, there was another question up there. You can actually really throw it. It's like a softball.
Hi, I have a question regarding to the line between the current modern art world and galleries and also film festivals, because like the videos can be now in galleries as well and the museums. So I'm wondering, like, for filmmakers, if we make more like experimental films or like that, how do we actually, apart from film festivals, how do we approach the galleries or museums and show our work? So there are different kind of ways to show our work. And what's the difference between that kind of museum-like videos and the film festivals? Is it like more stories within the film festivals or like more experiments in the museum world?
So I think the most important thing at this point is, as a filmmaker, you also need to think about how. Film festivals is obviously a good way to go, but also if you want your work to be shown in a museum or gallery gallery, there are a couple of things to consider, right? If your work is going to be, site-specific or installation-based, that's one thing to consider. That's completely different. But then there's another thing where if it's a single-screen work, we don't necessarily, whatever we show doesn't have to have a certain, we don't really have a meter of experimental level, so there's, it's really a wide range, so we don't have that kind of criteria that's defining that. I don't think that's too much putting it into a box. Also, I think the word experimental now is being used quite overly, and it's usually if people are not familiar with the 20th century, and they'll come across something that it's a narrative, but something with a little bit of another type of kind of storytelling, they can call it experimental, just because it was a little pushy for them.
It tells a lot about the normativity of narratives and
what is
formats
the
we've
norm,
been talking
right?
about. Yeah.
I mean, if we're talking about that's another thing, like what the norm is of narrative storytelling, and of course Western or Hollywood cinema has a completely different formula going on for them. But then then there's this incredible other world of storytelling that needs to be explored. So it's really, I think, up to the filmmaker. We do have people get in touch, artists, filmmakers do get in touch with us, but then again, it's a dialogue, and it's something to be talked about, and if it's going to be shown under what kind of a context and critique it also has a lot of value, of course. So it's not just like somebody applies and then we show their film, but it has to have some sort of communication with us that we want to make a point about.
But
basically,
it's also something I don't know, and I've oftentimes been wondering, is there, for example, platforms for filmmakers who provide their films also for galleries and for a museum context, which is maybe a practical information that could be useful to the talents as submitting to festivals to come into a kind of circuit of
there
distribution?
are now more, I think, distributors for more artist films, let's say, I guess, like for example Argos in Belgium is a good example of that. I would say you could check them out because they take on your film, and they do get in touch with institutions, and they do manage, and because certain works can be part of exhibitions, but then can be part of single screening programs. But I feel like we're seeing more and more of these, which is kind of neat, because one reason I think is that thanks to the internet, that now we are really in a great position we can watch a lot of work without spending, without having to go. And it's going to be, and it's a work that's maybe you would have never been able to see maybe 30 years ago. So that's pretty incredible. And maybe that's why now we also have more of a diverse range, and now we can talk about places that people have forgotten, right? African content is super important. For example, I feel like for example in Turkey, I know that this is much maybe super lesser known, and it needs to be introduced because there's this whole world of differences to discover. But it's really, I think, up to you to go for it in that sense. But and the gallery world is a completely different world, by the way. I mean, talk about conservative, right? Because then, just like film festivals, the art world will have its own art fairs, and that's a completely different ball game that is usually very disruptive to the whole economy of, I think, because I don't know how it's a different sort of political game there by labeling, giving a price to a piece, and then have it kind of, all these auctions and all that, but let's not get into that.
Market value and market logic. But maybe the parameters are a bit more random. There was another question up there. You have your mic already, and then we'll go on.
Specifically to the question about the marketplace, I feel that there is something that you all kind of stumbled upon. However, it isn't very central to the idea of what we're talking about, because I'm wondering how in curation we can have a say on the economical aspects of institutions or grassroots, whether they're film festivals or art world, because we all have these ideas of, talking about inclusivity or sort of leftist ideas of wanting everyone to be represented, about equality between women and men. And then on the other hand, we have L'Oréal as a sponsoring a red lipstick where people are standing outside of the Berlinale Palace and standing in line for half an hour to buy a red lipstick with a Berlinale logo on it. And we don't say anything about it. right? Like there is this thing that you were talking about, diplomacy. Yes, of course there's diplomacy, and then where does this line stand? Because that is also what carries on within like funds and what is the trends. So this year everyone is interested in ecology. So everyone wants to give money to ecology. So what you said also, Claire, about the African content is on fashion now, so great, wonderful. But how do we then sustain these ideas? How does it not fall into identity politics of falling into let's focus on it now because this is where the money is, and then move on to something else, or have these ideas of promoting ideas of leftist for left for another left, and then actually not lobbying right for having sponsors that are working on those same political aspects.
I think it's something you tackled before when we were talking about how, for example, sponsorship and funding does actually influence content decisions. And where does, we didn't explicitly go into where this happens and how this happens, because I think the contexts of our work are so different.
Yeah.
But if you...
I think Claire also mentioned that for the Directors' Fortnight at Cannes, it isn't funded by the film festival, and I think since it is the Directors' Union in France, it has definitely like a lot of different implications, but I'm also wondering what it would be when you are talking about institution versus grassroots, what it would mean for an institution that's lacking government funding in the case of Turkey, and what does all of these imply in regards to politics and pushing a leftist agenda?
Yeah, I think when I spoke about that these narratives have to be challenged, I think it's really, and the way that they are articulated has to be challenged. I think that also implies funding, and it also means that when, for example, you are working for an institution, in my case more linked to the art world, that, for example, I was asked this question actually because in another situation, when I put this forward, I said, we are all cultural workers from these contexts, we are providing this, what are we doing about it? Like I'm saying it also asking myself. And I was told, no, this is a colonial art world and that's how it works. And I don't know, archives are Western. And for me, this was really problematic. And then there was a kind of challenge, like, well, what would you do about it then? And for me, I think it's super important that in a moment where, yeah, it is maybe being tokenized, like revolution in certain institutions that do a show about 68 in, I don't know where, but when that place is acquiring these works that you have provided for them somehow, I think it's very important, first of all, to make sure that it's, the institution is usually very happy because they can buy this very cheaply because they have discovered it before, I don't know who. And then you can challenge this. You can say, actually, this is not a fair price. You can also say, when will this be shown in that context? Why not ally with another institution and make sure they acquire an equally relevant piece in that context? So if they say that they are, basically what I'm trying to say is that they shouldn't be left off the hook. And I think we have to push for that in the instances when it's necessary. So if they say we are so interested in these histories, we want to support it, then you make sure you make it very clear how those instances and those contexts and those works can be supported. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I love wearing red lipstick. It's not like, for me, I would rather focus on that than focus on the lipstick. But if it's like, I don't know, a different kind of funding, I completely understand where you're coming from. But I would rather, instead of being in line for the lipstick, maybe be talking about these issues. But I think it's super important and super relevant, and it's actually not something that we have invented now, like talking about how art is funded and what it means and what that actually does to the work is, for me, a very crucial question that has been asked for decades already, and I think we have to continue making sure that it's asked and put on the floor like all the time.
Thank you. We have time for a very last question up there, and then we have to close the panel.
And I would like to actually dig back into a question that was already asked, but I would ask you to maybe answer a bit more thoroughly. in the curation process, and I mean really practical, how do you go about finding those gems? If you have a festival and people apply, okay, you apply and you fetch from the pool, but if you're not fetching from a pool, people coming to you, how do you search? And my question is coming from the artist's point of view. So if we are an interdisciplinary artist and we think we maybe have a gem, or we know someone that might have a gem, what can we do to make ourselves visible, to make ourselves be found, possibly?
Who wants?
That's a good question. Yes. So, well, from my point of view, I have to say that I tried to work on being a nerd, meaning like following up with, even though like I'm not really a festival person, so I don't physically appear in certain places, but I tried to do as much as research as possible. From the festivals to other institutional programmings to maybe other gallery artists. And as I said, so this means you're saying that you don't have a gallery, nobody's representing you, and you have a work. I have to say, like, Vimeo is quite an amazing place. I know it sounds weird, but it's pretty phenomenal sometimes, the works that I've come across there. I guess it's a matter of also thinking about where you would like your work to be seen, also on your part, and work maybe on that way to reach out to people and have conversations and send these people that you think this place should show your work, your portfolio, and somehow, just I think it's the human contact at that point, but then also do consider these new means of new channels of distribution, like Argos, and they could also, I keep giving that example just because I can't think of any other institution right now, but and a lot of different cultural institutions will have amazing film programs, like the ICA in London, or several places in Berlin that I can't really cite here, but maybe just, I think it's important for you to acknowledge where do you want your work to be shown as well. It's the other side of the coin as well. So, and that is a good way to start. I would say. I don't know what you guys think.
Another aspect might also be labeling, because many people oftentimes research also topic and theme-wise, so it also helps to contextualize your work in the context that you would refer to it. Yeah.
And what is surprising, I think, is all the time everyone is looking at who's looking at you as well. So it's like, where have you been? Like which Biennale or which gallery, which museum, which film festival. So, or who's scouting your film? Like sometimes you apply with a film and they're just answering, let me know if someone else is interested. So what does it mean? You're not interested in the film, but if someone is interested, then you will have a second look. It's a kind of tricky game, but yeah, I think it's like make your work, of course, choose if it's more the art world or gallery museums that you're looking for, the Biennale or the film festival network, then push, apply, meet people who know people, and then step by step, make your name circulate or send emails. We also receive emails like, hello, I applied with this film, and we always look at the film that have, when we receive an email. Yeah. It's not necessarily that we're gonna select it, but because you took time to write an email, we're gonna check on the platform, did she register, is the film there, and we're gonna have a look. So of course, when you have tons of films, you don't have a specific answer like, okay, we dislike the film because of this, or the film is powerful, but Generally, you receive a general letter like, oh, unfortunately, out of 5,000 applications, your film is not selected. But, well, it's also the game. But sometimes it also helps. And, yeah, everyone started from the ground. Of course, there are some people who knows people from the beginning, or maybe their parents or whatever, within the film industry, and that helps. But I know many people that are not coming from this background, and after years and years, they are there. So it just... yeah, a matter of pushing, and regarding what said your colleagues earlier, what the criteria, whatever, it was like I was promoting African films before it was sexy, and I will be there after it will be sexy. So it's like, it's just, so you make your films and you will be there, rather film festival select you or museum select you. It just, maybe you'll find another collective and maybe altogether you'll be powerful to promote your film in another level. So I think there is no answer except pushing where you want to go.
Okay.
I just think it's really important to make something that I think is an assumption that should always be clarified. Anybody claiming to know like everything is lying immediately. So no, even people that you think maybe are actually within the interest realm of your work and maybe should know your work, maybe they don't, and that's really important to just allow that sort of mutual humbleness to always exist and always approach people that you think could be interested in what you're doing. Because I think this idea of these like curators as these kind of like telepathic knowers of everything that travel all over the world discovering, it's really bullshit, and it really needs to, like, no, it's not true, and it's a very belligerent way of constructing a milieu, and I think forget about that. It doesn't exist, and at least the people I know and respect have a very long trajectory of looking into something, and this is where their resources are. So the people that they have met in this, being interested in these different realms. So, like, don't be afraid to approach someone who you feel is fine to whatever it is that you're doing, that could be tuned in to what it is that you are interested in also. And as you said, Fatma, at some point, like, institutions are made of people, so for me it's those people. But also no assuming that people should know or that they don't know. Like, just tell whoever you think, and that's also super important. Like, don't tell people super interested in squares about your triangle, because probably it's going to be a big waste of energy for everyone.
But I guess, sorry, didn't mean to. But I think, as you say, it's also a matter of visibility in both directions, and where curators expose what they're interested in, how their processes look like, and artists make themselves visible, or platforms who do the intermediate work, who actually provide the communications that can be super helpful for this to actually happen. Yeah.
But actually, I don't mean curators only. I mean, like, these learning communities that I've talked about, researchers, people that are colleagues, peers that are doing things that you feel are meaningful. Those are the people that should know your work, because those are the people that will be interested in it and
Definitely
will be able to help you grow together. So I think this is something that for me is really important with my students. Like, they forget that it's their peers that they learn most from, and that will help them most that will support their work.
And
way more than the teachers. Like, they will learn way more from their peers than from their teachers.
And something really helpful is, like, follow an artist that you really love and you think your work is close to, and just check out where he has been or where she has been, in which galleries, in which networks, and try to apply to the same places, because sometimes because your work is close, maybe you will find other ways. I know that some people do that, and everyone is looking at as I said, every film festival, when they do a selection, all the festival programmers are checking, like, oh, we watched this film, oh, we missed this one, where this filmmaker is coming from, but we didn't receive it, and da-da-da-da-da. So it's the same everywhere. So just, select and follow also as you said, the peers and the one you believed in, and yeah.
We unfortunately have to stop. I think we could have gone on for much longer. Thank you for your patience and your interest and your sharing.